website at lbc.co.uk or the LBC YouTube and Facebook feeds. Joining me for the next hour to answer your questions, we have comedian Geoff Norcott. He's the host of the What Most People Think podcast. I wish I'd thought of that title. Tim Loughton is the Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, and he's acting chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for 2 weeks only, I gather, Tim. We might come on to that a little bit later. Richard Burgon is Labour MP for Leeds East. He was a leading member of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. And Sophia Gaston is director of the Foreign Policy Group. So, time for your questions. 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Sophia, I suppose the Foreign Policy Group does what it says on the tin, but what do you actually do? Who do you work with?
Well, we're actually called the British Foreign Policy Group. So
I love the word British in, right?
and that is a very important part of what we do. We're essentially trying to make sense of this new landscape. We're trying to come up with a new foreign policy strategy after we've left the European Union. And I suppose my organisation is trying to play a constructive role in that, looking at the evolving threats that we face, but also the opportunities that Britain has in this new landscape.
Well, that was just a roundabout way of saying if you'd like to phone in on foreign policy questions, we have an expert, at least one expert, maybe three, maybe not three experts, Geoff, no. Now, you're on tour, aren't you, as well?
I just finished the autumn leg and just in time for the new variant, and then I'm going back out. Surely once we've got a new vaccine for the new variant, I'll be back out in February. I'm sure it'll be fine before then. But yeah, I'm back out. I'm doing Carlisle. I mean, I'm going up north, Ian. Going north, Richard. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, Richard just bridled.
Like a big sacrifice.
I could sense him bridling there.
No, but you're Yorkshire.
Leeds, yeah.
Leeds. So
have you been to
Carlisle,
Leeds?
I mean, that is known.
Because on your podcast, you are a bit dismissive about some places that don't buy tickets very quickly, like Lincoln, for example.
Lincoln, I'm still sticking in there with Lincoln. Leicester, it's over between us. You can't have a relationship where only one of you is working at making it work. You know, I've got the message from Leicester loud and clear.
I'll get on to Keith Vowes. He'll get them in for you.
I'll definitely go one of his
Talking of
parties.
Keith Vowes, former chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, how much are you going to miss Yvette Cooper? Because she gave that committee quite a profile, didn't she?
Yeah, Yvette was very good. I suppose it's promotion, becoming Shadow Home Secretary.
Pay cut.
Well, we've had some good inquiries over the last few years. She's chaired it. She's chaired it well. So I now have the honour of chairing it for all of 2 weeks until they elect her successor.
Because it has to be a Labour MP, doesn't it?
It's a Labour chair committee.
And Richard, who do you think might be standing?
Well, I think Yasmin Qureshi might be standing. She's very able. I've heard that Diana Johnson, who's done a lot of good work, may be standing. So let's see. Or there may be some names we haven't thought of yet. But I'm sure that Yvette will be a big loss to the group.
Right, shall we go to our first question? It's Sean in concert. Hello, Sean.
Hello, my Ian, son. How are you doing? Hello,
Hi, right, thank you.
Hi.
I want to know why people got fined for breaking the rules. Should Johnson be fined, and should the other 50 people should be fined as well? Because I think it's an absolute disgrace what's happened here.
Well, bear in mind that Boris Johnson wasn't actually at this party, according to the BBC, so I'm not sure that he should get a fine. But Geoff Norcott, let's come to you first on this. Obviously, it's the subject of PMQs today. Keir Starmer was asking Boris Johnson about this party at number 10. Boris Johnson said no COVID rules have been broken. But you think, how can you have a party at that time when there were fairly restrictive rules on this sort of thing? Should people who were fined in similar circumstances get their fines reimbursed? I think that's what Sean wants to know.
I think it needs to be one or the other. I think one of the astonishing things about MPs, right, you guys, you both live in this world, is one of the most gossipy, leaky jobs in the world. I mean, you can't even trust people on a WhatsApp group not to screenshot it and share it, which was what I think is the most egregious moral sin possibly known to man. So the idea that you can go to this party at Christmas when there are national restrictions in place and for it not to emerge is ridiculous. It's
taken a year, though, hasn't it?
It's taken a year, and it feels like there were people on both sides that knew about it. So that's kind of curious in its own way, which suggests perhaps that there were transgressions on both sides. But at the end of the day. The Tories are in the spotlight for this, and they've got to face the heat. I think that Boris Johnson could make his usual mistake of trying to be too loyal, and protect his own. I don't know how many times that's got to blow up in his face for him to realise that is not the right course of action. I think the other thing is a lot of people are comparing this sort of to Barnard Castle too. I think it does feel slightly different. If this was happening at a time where none of us could go to Christmas parties right now, I think the temperature might be even higher than it is. But I take a lot from the BBC News most read is one of the real keys as to whether a story's got cut through, and a lot of political stuff does not register at all, and it's been number one today on the story. So I think it'd be dangerous for the Tories to dismiss this as kind of what they call it, village bubble talk.
Westminster bubble talk.
There you go. It's not that.
Tim Loughton, this is sort of Barnard Castle light, isn't it? Do as I say, don't do as I do.
Look, I don't know the full details of all this.
But you've had a day to find them out.
And I've not heard about it until Keir Starmer raised it at, not very competently, I thought, at PMQs. So if somebody has not abided by the rules, albeit a year ago, there needs to be consequences. And of course, they should be subject to the same rules as the rest of us. So absolutely, but I know no more than that. Barnard Castle, I said at the time, Dominic Cummings, and I worked with Dominic Cummings, unfortunately, so I know what he's capable of. The Prime Minister was far too loyal and should have sacked him. It did.
He probably agrees with you now.
He certainly agrees with me now, but it took him a while to catch up with that one. So, of course, he should have gone. And it became a totemic issue because it was so laughable. And frankly, it should have been, thanks very much, but good night. And that's the end of him. And we had to have a few more months of agony. And it did us a lot of damage as well. For what? So let's find out who's responsible here. And if there's somebody needs to have a penalty, then let's do it.
Richard Burgon, Tim says Keir Starmer didn't raise it very competently, did he?
I thought Keir raised it in a robust way. And at the end of the day, it speaks to the injustice.
It'd be robust, but was it competent?
It's more than competent. It held Johnson to account on it. The reality is that this speaks to people and annoys people so much because when you're leading a country through a crisis, you've got to lead by example. It can't be do as I say, not as I do. And whether it's Barnard Castle, whether it's not wearing a mask in a hospital, or whether it's hosting this party while other people aren't seeing their loved ones at Christmas.
But he wasn't there, apparently.
It does seem to be that it's one rule for them and another rule for everyone else, and people think that's unfair. And I think there's a particular duty on political leaders, on the Prime Minister, to lead by example, so that people, during a crisis in particular, so that people have confidence in the messages that government are giving and pull together through a national crisis.
Okay, Sophia?
I think the British people understand that because we've been in a pandemic that has required an enormous amount of government mobilisation in lots of different areas, there were people in government working day and night in the offices in Whitehall when the rest of us were working from home. Now, I think most people would appreciate that, that's going to involve some kind of social aspect as well. That's the realities of that working environment. I think the broader question is there a problem where the people who are designing these rules, many of which were incredibly draconian and had enormous social and emotional consequences for people, are themselves living a fundamentally different life? Will that at points prove a barrier to empathy? And so, I think that's probably the bigger question here, is the fact that people were, having a Christmas party reflective of a much broader issue where people policymakers couldn't fundamentally understand what the rest of the country was going through? Or was this people who were working really hard as public servants blowing off a little bit of steam and then going back to their jobs?
A lot of people work really hard, don't they? I mean, I normally, every year, will take my producers out for a Christmas party or lunch or dinner or whatever. I didn't last year for obvious reasons, and nobody, there wasn't, Global Radio didn't have a Christmas party for that reason. Yeah, all the staff work incredibly hard, and then they look at this, and I think they can be reasonably annoyed that the people at the top aren't setting it. It doesn't really matter whether Boris Johnson was there or not, does it? It was in number 10. I can't believe that he wouldn't have been aware of it.
I think it was a poor judgment call, and it seems to me a judgment that was made in a bubble rather disconnected from the lives that most other people were living at that time. And, I think the question is, was that a sort of canary in the coal mine for a broader structure that was influencing the decisions that were being taken? Or was that just a lapse in judgment that led to a bad decision?
Let me just read a text out that I've had. It actually refers to a call that we took in the last hour. It's the last caller in that hour. This is from Raj in Colchester. He says, been listening for the hour so far and just parked up outside my house and I heard Susan. Thank God she came on and made her point so beautifully and passionately. I'm the same as her, a lifelong Tory boy. I voted for Boris when he ran for mayor and recently when he ran for PM. I've loved the guy and to an extent still do. I've campaigned for the Tories against Labour voters and Lib Dem voters. My problem now is how can I defend Boris? How can I defend the Tories against any opposition voter? They've left themselves with zero integrity and they've left their once loyal Tory voters like me with zero to defend them with, voting Lib Dem next time. Well, Geoff Norcott, you might say that's a drastic thing to do, to vote Lib Dem, but
I mean, calm down, mate. Let's breathe. Let's all. We've all tried voting Lib Dem. I mean, I've done it too. I didn't inhale, but I've certainly experimented.
But you self-identify as being centre right. Do you feel a bit like that as well?
Yeah, it does get tricky to the point where you have your political orientation, but you do need to feel that the party mechanism that represents it. It does get harder and harder because there's a succession. There's Barnard Castle. Matt Hancock wasn't fired immediately. There's been a lot of situations where Boris has stood by people for too long.
24 hours, wasn't it? It wasn't that long.
But it was obvious that he had to go, and it was obvious that he's got this relationship with the press where he doesn't want to kind of give them their pound of flesh, blood, whatever it is that the press want. He doesn't want to give it to them. And yeah, I know, I totally empathise with that. I suppose the one thing that the Tories do have in their favour is, given all the other parties skew left and various shades of left, they're the only game in town on the right-hand side of the fence. So there's a degree to which people are astonished that their polling holds up.
That's a really important thing, isn't it, Richard? That's always been the Conservatives' advantage, where anything to the centre-right, they've got it cleared up. Now Nigel Farage is off the scene. That gives you a real challenge, doesn't it?
Oh, it is, and what the Tories are trying to do is make permanent that electoral coalition that coalesced around them under the slogan "Get Brexit Done," particularly in northern seats that voted to leave the EU. But when it comes to Johnson, I think lots of people have fallen out with him now. It's interesting, a colleague said to me the other day that in their constituency, people are no longer calling him Boris, it's now Johnson, and that almost speaks to people moving away from him. He seems to spend his time defending the indefensible and basically bringing shame upon the office he's in. Whether it was the other week when he was, trying to defend second jobs and MPs on the make, he led his own MPs up to the top of the hill and then deserted them. More and more people, including the public, are coming to the conclusion that you just can't trust Boris Johnson. And I think that worries Tory MPs, particularly in those seats
not showing
that they won for
the
the first time.
Polls. It is on his approval ratings. They're the lowest they've ever been, but Labour still finding it difficult to inch ahead in the party polls. But we're going to come on to that in just a moment with our next question. So 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to call us and put a question to our panel. It's 16 minutes past 8.
LBC. If you question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
90 minutes past 8. In case you've just tuned in, we have comedian Geoff Norcott, Conservative MP Tim Loughton, Labour MP Richard Burgon, and foreign policy guru, I'm going to call you, Sophia Gaston. Right, let's go to our next call. It is Keith in Rickmansworth. Keith, hello.
Hello. I heard your shout out the other night.
Did you? I can't even remember what I shouted you out for.
Well, I don't know. Unfortunately, you always link me up with a chap from Concert, which I don't like.
Oh, okay. Well, you're on the same wavelength politically, Keith. Come on, you can't complain.
Well, I don't know about that.
What's your
what
question?
I phoned up about is because, good to speak to you, Iain, anyway. What I phoned up about is that why is Keir Starmer, does he expect to bring the Labour Party together if he doesn't stop attacking members of his own party? He's so far right that anybody, I mean, someone like Richard Burgon has no chance of having a place in his cabinet. And if this goes
maybe
on,
he wouldn't want one.
well, whether he'd want one or not, the point is he wouldn't be offered it. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn offered seats for people like Yvette Cooper and all sorts of people like that. He was a unifier. This chap wants to bust everything apart. And does the panel agree that this is not the way to win power?
Who would you like to answer first, Keith?
Richard.
I thought you'd say that. No, I should tell you, Richard, that in a previous conversation I've had with Keith, he was touting you for Labour Party leader, so you have a fan there.
That's good. It's good to have a fan. Obviously, a person of great discernment and judgment. In relation to Keith's question, well, Keir promised unity. That's what he promised when he stood for Labour leader. He became Labour leader on what basically was a 10-point left-wing programme. He hasn't followed through with those 10 points, and he hasn't created a Labour Party defined by unity. I think some of the people around Keir, like Peter Mandelson, who said that he wanted the Socialist campaign group of Labour MPs to be put in a sealed tomb, he said that in the late 90s or early 2000s, they don't want unity. I think the advice that they're giving Keir is bad, because I know that people in the party are often obsessed with the way that Neil Kinnock took on Militant in that speech at the Labour Party conference in the mid-80s. But Neil Kinnock wasn't remembered for winning a general election. He was remembered for that speech. And I think in politics, people who think that it's prime ministerial to be seen taking on your own party and engaging in internal party fights, I think they make a mistake. I think it can end up reducing the standing of a leader. If people are looking for a potential prime minister, they don't want to see somebody who's a kind of well-honed fighter of internal party disputes and wrangling. So really, I think it's a shame that the left isn't represented in Keir's shadow cabinet. I think that's a shame for Keir as well.
There isn't literally a single member of the shadow cabinet now who you could describe as, well, very left. I mean, if you think the Labour Party is the centre-left party, there is no one there who agrees with your style of Labour Party politics, for example. Is that? I mean, do you think there ever will be, or do you think that stone has been cast now?
Well, I think if Keir had a cabinet which, a shadow cabinet which represented the kind of broad politics of the Labour Party, because the Labour Party itself is a coalition between Socialists, Social Democrats and trade unions, I think that would help Keir. But it's not what he promised the Labour Party members. And I know that there are very loud voices in his ear telling him to wage war on the left. But at the end of the day, it's not been good that in the last 2 years, while the government's been responsible, in my opinion, for the unnecessary deaths of tens of thousands of people in our country, a whole load of corruption and the rest of it, sometimes it's seen like the leadership or people around it have had more passion for taking the fight to their own members and the left within the Labour Party than they have for holding the Tories to account and taking the fight to the Tories.
If Keir Starmer does another reshuffle maybe later in the year or next year, gets his shadow cabinet ready for the general election, and he comes to you and says, Richard, I think I've made a mistake. I need to get one or two people with your brand of politics back in the top team. I want to offer you a job. Would you accept one?
Well, I'd always be happy, as all left MPs would be really, to be in there pushing for policies like 100,000 council houses a year, a £15 an hour minimum wage, an end to 0 hours contracts, an actual radical kind of climate justice programme, including public ownership of the major utilities.
So it would depend on his policy platform as to whether you would accept a job.
Well, if Keir was pursuing the 10 pledges he made to members, which helped him win the Labour leadership election on a left platform, then left MPs would be very, very happy being in that shadow cabinet.
Otherwise not.
I think a lot of trust has been lost in terms of the way the party's been managed. And one thing that he should do, and it won't surprise you for me that I'm going to say this, is that we've got this ridiculous situation where the former leader of the Labour Party is a Labour Party member and a Member of Parliament, but not a Labour Member of Parliament. I think a good sign to show that we do want unity would be to have Jeremy Corbyn back in as a Labour MP.
But from Keir Starmer's position, it's actually quite useful saying, no, see, I've dealt with the Corbyn problem. All you moderate voters that didn't like Corbyn, you can come back now because I've got rid of him. That's his logic, isn't it?
Well, the policy platform that we stood on in 2017 when we nearly won, and 2019 where admittedly we got smashed when it became a Brexit election defined by Brexit, the policies are all very popular. That with the public, that's why Keir included them in his 10 pledges to stand to be leader.
Sophia?
I mean, I would challenge this idea of Jeremy Corbyn being a unifying figure, and I think you only have to look at the state of the Labour Party in his wake, which felt very broken and very divided and further away from power than ever. And, you know, as someone who wants us to have a lively democracy with a strong opposition party, you know, I think that's a very sad thing. Let's also not forget why Jeremy Corbyn has been suspended by the Labour Party, and his behaviour in handling anti-Semitism crisis within the party, which was frankly deplorable. So, you know, there's that. And then I think, you know, on the Labour Party tactics, I mean, the reality is that the only way forward for the Labour Party to really come to power is to pitch to the centre. And, you know, whether they can do that alone or if it's going to have to be in a coalition of other parties, it doesn't matter. The end result has to be a pitch to the centre ground. And, you know, you can have all of your values and ideas and ideologies, but they're absolutely worth nothing if you can't get to power. And
okay. Tim?
Well, just to pick up on something Richard said, he said you don't remember Neil Kinnock for winning elections. It's for that speech. Well, that's because Neil Kinnock never won any elections.
That's the very point I was making.
Yeah, but you seem to have a problem with what winning elections actually means. I struggle to know what Keir Starmer actually stands for. And he's a nice guy. He was on the Home Affairs Select Committee with me. He's a competent lawyer. But what does he actually believe in? And time again, when you are trying to get to grips with what does the Labour Party he now leads believe in, what is their policy on today, you know, social care, some really big questions like that. And he's asking questions about a party that happened 12 months ago. That's the problem they've got. Now, is he a unifier? I think what he needs to do is probably what Neil Kinnock and Tony Blair and the Clause 4 movement did, was to bring back the moderates, the sensible, the competent people within the Labour Party. And I would favour that, because I think if there's a problem that we've got is we don't have an effective, smart opposition, and that can make governments, and I think at times this government, lazy and complacent. So we need to be kept on our toes rather better, and I'm not sure Keir Starmer's capable of doing that. Now, he's brought back some big beasts. I think Yvette Cooper is a big beast, still a potential leader as well. But they've got to up their game. They are completely disconnected with the public. The public doesn't know what they stand for, and they want moderate, balanced, effective opposition. They don't want ideologues, which I'm afraid is what Richard had with Jeremy Corbyn. So Keir's got to make a decision. Why hasn't Jeremy Corbyn been dealt with yet? Is he going to come back as a Labour MP, or is he going to be properly chucked out of the party? Why is it taking so long to decide that?
Well, I guess they have
procedures
to go through, don't they?
They've taken years.
Geoff?
I think initially Richard said some stuff which I think was fair in that Keir Starmer did stand on that ticket, and he has been a bit disingenuous in terms of how he's related to the left of the Labour Party. But then Richard said a couple of things which, for a sort of, centre-right floating voter like me, I say floating voter, I've been in one place for a while, but that are alienating. You said £15 minimum wage. You're talking about a 50% jump at a time when small businesses are healing. That is a red flag for me in terms of the economy. You mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. This feels like backwards looking. You mentioned 2017 that you nearly won. You didn't nearly win. You were 60 seats behind. And if 80 seats is a landslide, then 60 seats is quite close to being a landslide away from being even the biggest party. I think that, you talk about him bringing back big beasts. I think all he's really done is brought back some people you've heard of, because there was a period under Starmer where he brought in some seriously inept people, and I do not understand how certain people were in certain posts for so long. Yvette Cooper, yes, we know who she is.
Who?
Well, this is where I'm going to prove the point. I can't remember what the previous Shadow Chancellor's name was. Very
John
nice.
McDonnell?
No, I wouldn't.
Annalise Dodds.
Annalise Dodds, very nice lady, but she seemed terrified. I think Rachel Reeves is a better bet. Jonathan Ashworth, Shadow Health Secretary during a pandemic, and no one really knew who he was. So these were...
Is that really fair?
Oh, yeah, I do think it's fair. I mean, I did a joke about it on a television programme where I put up a photo and said, this is Jonathan Ashworth. And no one questioned me. I said, actually, that's just an HR manager from Dumfries. No one knew. No one knew. So he's made
I
some
doubt whether
steps.
they'll say that about West Streeting.
They might not, and that's what makes it a good move. So these are good noises, right? But in terms of the PLP, you could, I think outside of the front bench, there are MPs that worry me a bit. And then with Labour, there's this question of the activist base, momentum, the membership, where they sit politically and culturally in relation to the country, and the relationship with the trade union. So it does still feel for me like Labour have got this big fight to happen, and I do wonder, Richard, you're a proper left-wing bloke. Do you want to be in the party like this? Would you not rather that you were in a party that sort of reflected more of what you really passionately felt? Because I don't know if this time the fissure in the Labour Party can be reconciled.
Well, the Labour Party's always been, because it's a mass party.
But it feels different this time. I have to say, I don't think this idea that you can go and take on the militants in the way that Kinnock did, and it's kind of 2 + 2 = 4. This is politically a very different time where people want their exact views represented. Wouldn't you want your exact views represented?
Well, no one's exact views can be represented, because otherwise we'd have one party for every single person in this country. A political party is about collectivism, is about working out what you agree on, and yes, what you disagree on, but being led by values and principles. Your worldview, is different to mine, and that's all part of democracy, isn't it? Well, the Labour Party is a party set up by the trade unions, a coalition of socialists and social democrats. I'm on the left socialist side of that. That's fine. But actually, the path to get Keir into Downing Street, which is where I want to see him, does involve pushing the kind of policies, yes, originally pushed by the left, which were part of his 10-point plan, because they're the concrete, practical policies that can defend and lift living standards. People are really struggling out there, struggling to keep the head above water. People are struggling to afford a mortgage, struggling to pay the rent.
But I'm talking about this conflict. You've got a leader and a deputy leader that are patently at odds. They do not like each other. I mean, what happened with that reshuffle was a complete blindside, and it might have been politically shrewd, but that's the very top, and that runs through the party at the moment. I think a lot of people feel that.
I don't think many people across the country will be talking about perceived differences between the deputy leader and the leader. I think things are led by policy. It's not about great individuals in politics. What we need is a clear policy platform that people will say, do you know what? That will improve my life. That'll make my family better off. That'll improve public services. And that's what the Labour Party exists to do. And I think that if Keir pushes those kind of policies, it'll help him get into number 10. But that involves not going along with a demonisation of the left. The left has a very important role to play in the Labour Party, including in winning an election.
Right, well, we could have carried that on for the rest of the programme, I think, because it was all very interesting. But we are going to move on. Thank you all very much for your contributions so far. 0345 6060 973. I'd love to come back to you, Keith, but I think we know what your answer is to your own question. It's 8:33. Dominic Ellis has the news headlines.
Boris Johnson has not denied Number 10 held a Christmas party last year. The Prime Minister insists all guidance was followed completely after being criticised by the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. The government's published details of how it'll spend an increase in national insurance as part of England's social care reforms. Around £1 billion to be invested Over the next 3 years on things like staff training and housing support, Labour says ministers have failed to address the immediate pressures facing social care. And the Women's Tennis Association is suspending all of its tournaments in China due to concerns over the welfare of Peng Shuai. The player disappeared from public view for 3 weeks after making sexual assault allegations against a top Chinese official. LBC weather, a mostly clear, cold and breezy night, showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland, a low of freezing.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:37. Let me reintroduce you to my panel. Richard Burgon is with us. He's Labour MP for Leeds East. Tim Loughton is Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham. Geoff Norcott is comedian and host of the What Most People Think podcast. And Sophia Gaston is director of the British Foreign Policy Group. Sophia, you're going to like this question, I think, possibly more than the rest of the panel. Joseph is in Kensington. Hello, Joseph.
Hello, Ian. Thank you for taking my call. Great show. First-time caller. So basically, my question is, what is the UK going to do about China?
Well, that's a 2.5 hour discussion, isn't it, really?
Not with me, isn't
Sophia, let's come to you for some erudite analysis.
Well, look, the UK's already been on a bit of a journey about China. If you consider where we were in 2015 with this kind of golden era, where we were simply regarding China as an economic opportunity, where things stand now, we really have, I wouldn't say done a 180, but we've definitely had a fundamental reset. And there's a lot more caution now in that relationship. But I think there's still a heck of a lot more we need to do. we still haven't done a comprehensive end-to-end audit of all our vulnerabilities across all departments. And the thing is, we have identified, the government's come out and said China is a systemic challenge, i.e. it sort of seeps into so many different aspects of our economy, our democracy, our society, our national security. But we haven't quite done all the machinery of government changes that we need to do to actually be able to tackle that. And part of that's about capabilities. We've been really underpowered in the relationship because, China has invested a lot of time and effort and resources into getting to know us and our strategic thinking. They don't always get it right. But, we just haven't had the capabilities or prioritize that in government. So even just simple things like Mandarin speakers who can sort of get in there and really understand what China's doing. And that's important because China is obviously known for having these kind of very long-term plans, which we haven't always kind of taken the time to read and take heed of. But there's actually a lot of change on the China side at the moment. Over recent years, they've become more risk tolerant. The domestic compact between China's leaders and citizens is in a bit of state of flux. It's starting to get involved in geopolitics in a way that it didn't before. So China is changing. We need to rapidly catch up and make sure that we can go into this relationship from a position of confidence. And we also need to look more broadly at China's interests. If we're assessing our vulnerabilities, they might not necessarily be priorities for us, but we should also be taking into account what's a priority for China. So something like, the manufacturing of semiconductors, which, I know is not something that everybody's thinking about day to day, but these are very, very important for technological advancement. And there's something where China's been falling behind the West. We have had some of these capabilities. We had a plant that was able to manufacture some parts of these here, and we've just sold off a lot of these assets in the West. So we need to get much smarter about those capabilities in areas of strategic competition and advantage. And I think, look, let's be real. China is absolutely enormous. We can't pretend they're not there. We have to engage with them in various ways. But we also need to be working a heck of a lot better with our allies, putting aside differences to deal with the challenge. Because China is, a fundamental challenge to not just our kind of immediate individual strategic interests, but a much more existential challenge to the future of the liberal world order.
Now, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're banned from entering China.
I'm on the sanctioned list of China.
Why is that? What have you done?
So I dared to be one of 5 MPs who got sanctioned for basically calling out China on human rights abuses or against the Uyghurs. In my case, going up many years, I chair the Tibet All Party group. I've always stood up for the Tibetan people, 1 million of whom have died at the hands of the Chinese since the invasion. And because I was doing my job as an MP, calling out human rights abuses in Parliament, where we treasure free speech, then I'm sanctioned. So I can't, and my immediate family can't go to China. All my assets in China have been frozen. I haven't got any. It doesn't really make a difference. I can't do any business in China. And I have to say that has been a recruiting sergeant for people around the world now waking up to the existential threat. Absolutely right, Sophia, that China now poses. China is the most dangerous country in the world on so many fronts. And thank goodness we woke up to the Huawei contract. So we had to put pressure on the government to say, look, should we really be inviting in China into one of our most sensitive infrastructure projects?
But that ship sailed a long time ago. They're involved in our nuclear industry, they're involved in our water infrastructure.
And so they have tentacles all over the place, be it in businesses, be it in infrastructure projects, be it in Confucius Institutes on our campuses, the fact that they bring in huge amounts of revenue for Chinese students. It's the largest non-EU group of students. some universities rely for up to 30% of their revenue from Chinese students. That is really unhealthy. The fact that they've taken control of assets in Africa because of loans they've given them, which are completely unsustainable. They've cornered the market in lithium, rare earth metals that are essential for electric-powered cars. They are really smart people, and we have urgently got to wake up to the fact. And it's not just stuff, and we've got to wean ourselves off on reliance on cheap products from China, whether or not they're produced by slave labour Uyghurs, as many of them will be. But it's also the information age as well. They have eyes all over the place. You know, they are dumping data out of our systems from around the world back into Beijing, and too many people are just unaware of it. And we've got to wake up. There's some really interesting legislation being passed in America at the moment. So it's calling for full transparency of information about Chinese company listed on their markets. And if they don't do it within the next 18 months, 250 companies will be delisted from the American Stock Exchange. They have got tentacles everywhere, and we've got to stand up to it.
I'm reading a book at the moment called Freedom, How We Lose It and How We Fight Back by Nathan Law. He was the young guy who led the protests in Hong Kong, who's had to flee to this country.
Yeah.
He's going to be on the programme tomorrow from 8 o'clock for an hour. We're going to talk about what he says in this book. I'm only a third of the way through it, but it is horrific, some of the things that he's saying. We're going to be taking calls as well. So if you've got a particular interest in China and Hong Kong, make sure you listen and make sure you call in tomorrow after 8. Richard Burgon, it's one of those things where those policies where it's not really a party political thing, isn't it? It's something where there ought to be unity on both sides of the house on how we deal with the threats that are coming from China.
Well, first of all, and I'm sure that Tim didn't mean it in this way, but I think things can be said which accidentally have a damaging impact. When he was saying that, China has tentacles all over, 30% of students on campuses and the rest of it, I think we've got to be very careful that where our government has disagreements with the government of China, that this doesn't end up fueling anti-Chinese racism in our society. People,
that's not what it's about.
But people,
and that's the Chinese government. That's what they'd like you to believe. This is not about being anti-China. This is not an argument with China. It's an argument with the Chinese Communist Party government.
I'm saying...
Don't fall into their trap, Richard. That's their narrative.
There is an increased instance of racism faced by Chinese people in Britain, for example, in relation to COVID, and we've got to guard against that. But what I'd say more widely is, look, there's things that the government of the United States has done historically, which we profoundly disagree with. Invading other countries, using a nuclear bomb,
not committing genocide against millions of their own people, not responsible for the deaths of 1 million Chinese citizens who happen to be Tibetan. This is on an altogether different scale. Let's not try and call them in the same terms as America.
I was referring to the only use of a nuclear weapon in war against civilian populations and the invasion,
in peacetime, the Chinese
and the invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan. So
I don't really egregious to draw comparisons between the United States and China.
The point I want to make, however,
everything you've said, you could say in the States, you couldn't say in China. Anything I've said.
The point I want to make is that, of course, we need our government to speak up for human rights around the world. Of course, we need our government to speak, including to its allies, like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, about the human rights abuses there. But I think we need to avoid a rush into a new Cold War, because Cold Wars can become proxy wars, hot wars. That's not in the interest of anybody. And of course, our government will have disagreements with the government of China. But when it comes to climate change, for example, we do need to be working with China in relation to averting climate catastrophe. And you look, for example, at the huge refugee crises that are going to be caused because of climate catastrophe. There's going to be a need for more international cooperation when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the flow of refugees, and a whole host of other issues, diminishing resources. And that means working with governments in other countries who we have profound disagreements with on other issues.
In your answer there, I haven't heard one single condemnation of anything the Chinese government has done.
Including on the environment. 29% of greenhouse gases are produced by China, way and above any other nation. The last 11 years, they burnt more coal than the whole of the rest of the world put together. They are going the wrong way on climate change. We need to call them out, not say, we need to sit down and be nice to them. We need to make sure we're not buying goods from them that have been produced in environmentally unfriendly ways or by slave labour. So call them out.
Action is
not
needed.
our allies in America and elsewhere.
Action is needed from China and from the United States and from the UK on climate change. However, there is a line which is incorrect, that somehow people believe that per head of the population in China, their carbon footprint is greater than ours. That's not true. The average person in China has a smaller...
Stop defending
I'm
China.
not.
They're going the wrong way on climate
we need
change.
to have a sensible discussion about these things. China is a superpower. Of course, there'll be things on which we profoundly disagree with them. Of course, our government has to hold its allies and other countries to account on human rights abuses, and those discussions need to take place.
Do you believe they've committed genocide?
But see,
do you believe they've committed genocide?
The approach you're taking
is to ask you if you believe they committed genocide.
The approach that you're taking. The approach that you're taking is...
It's a straight question.
You're trying to basically create a political storm. Let me speak if that's okay.
With the House let me speak that genocide has been committed by the Chinese.
I'm saying that our government needs to hold other governments around the world, yes, including China, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, to account on human rights abuses. But we inevitably need a relationship.
Why do you find it so difficult to utter one word of condemnation about anything to do with China? I find it astonishing.
Richard, it does feel like a bit of whataboutery. We're talking about China right now, and you're talking about something that happened in 1945. I think that seems like a real leap, and it just feels like you want to evade the question. I mean, I want to get back to the question of what we've been asked here. I think, when we did Brexit, that even the most ardent Brexiteers would have said there'll be a hit to GDP, but there's a principle at stake here, which is one of democratic sovereignty. Let's do things in relation to China, which, might make us a bit poorer. But I think that, as Tim rightly says, and in the work that he's done, the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims is something that we might look back on. We might all look back on, Richard, in 40 years and just think, how are we part of a generation where that happened? And we aren't just talking like a civil war skirmish in one corner of a country. We're talking about something that involves huge numbers here. So I think it might be, and it might be true of other states that you mentioned as well, certain states in the Middle East, that we look in the mirror and say, it might make us a little bit poorer, but let's do the right thing now.
Final opportunity. Well, the Uyghurs, I mean, surely we can all agree that is a genocide.
Well, United Nations inspectors, should be welcomed into China to see what's going on. The international community needs to work together against human rights abuses. But I think it's almost a babyish approach to start getting into, the United States have never done anything wrong. China's never done anything wrong.
Nobody's saying that.
The reality is...
Can I just say one thing? If the conversation here, the topic of the day, if we'd had a listener call in about the United States, I would venture to guess that you would be very comfortable just talking about the United States and everything you feel about them for 5 minutes. We're meant to be talking about China, and you cannot talk about China without immediately comparing to other countries, whether that's allies or other strategic rivals. Why is that? Because it seems to me that this decision to constantly draw parallels or bring in comparisons, some of which I think are frankly quite egregious and some of them are fairly offensive to some of our allies, is actually a tactic that only serves the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah. In fact, some of that language is absolutely from their playbook. This is how they construct a moral argument about this to deflect attention away from their own crimes. So I think, we need to be real here. I do not understand why it is so difficult for you to specifically bring in a position and criticism about China as a country.
There are plenty of criticisms to make about China.
Well, why can't you make any?
Well, I can, and there are plenty of criticisms to make about lots of countries around the world. But I don't think that the Conservatives' changing position in relation to China, with respect, and Tim may be different, is related to human rights abuses.
Final opportunity to utter one criticism of China.
Well, I said there's plenty of things to criticise in China and in other societies. But But, as I say, I think that the Conservatives' changing position on China is related to geopolitics. It's not related to a sudden conversion to an interest in human rights.
Well,
but that sounds like
I've tried my best. Craig says, while Richard, stop talking. We are going to stop talking about this. Now, that's two subjects, so I could have gone on. I'm 8 minutes late for a break, which is probable sackable territory at LBC, so I better go to one now. It's at 8:53.
This is LBC.
It's
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:56. Now, we're going to have to be really quick on this question, and I'm afraid it's quite a difficult one, from Mike in Beverley. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Irene. I'll be as quick as I can. Does the panel think that the watering down of human rights legislation in the UK is the best way of dealing with the refugee crisis that's coming?
Tim Loughton.
I don't want to see a watering down of human rights legislation, but I do want to see legislation that is in the best interest of the British people. And too often we've had some actions from our courts that just seem to defy all logic. So we have a democratic parliament. Let's put it to the people as to the sort of human rights that they want to see under a British constitution. But that doesn't mean diluting human rights by any means. And given we've just been talking about human rights in China, although Richard wouldn't necessarily agree that happens there, it's a thing that I hold very dear.
Jeff.
Yeah, look, I mean, whatever redrawing of human rights laws and constitutional values there are, I just hope it's not just from Dominic Raab doing it. I'll put it that way.
Well, he is the Justice Secretary.
Yeah, for now.
Why do you say that?
Well, he's not a politician that fills me full of confidence, shall I say. But I'm sure he's got smart people around him, and I think, it's a delicate area at the moment. But yeah, I'm not sure he alone should be overseeing.
Do you wish to rush to your colleague's defence, Tim?
I'm a great fan of Dominic Raab, and he's got some great people around him.
I hear you loud and clear, Tim.
But he's really good on victims. I mean, that's the problem with human rights. Too often, it's more about the perpetrators than the victims, and I think that's the balance people want to see better.
Richard?
We shouldn't be watering down human rights, and I think that the way that the rhetoric that's been used about migrants has been absolutely stomach-turning, that's been used in Parliament by Conservative MPs. And it's heartbreaking. Tim laughs. His approach to human rights is selective.
I despair. I don't laugh. I despair.
His approach to human rights is selective. The
like
human stories
like
behind the human rights is so important. When you look at the human beings that have drowned in the sea.
What about the Uyghurs that have been abused in China by the Chinese state? I mean, that's a human rights abuse as well, isn't it?
Well, of course, the United Nations should go and look at that and inspect it, of
course. Why not just say yes? Why not just say, yes, it is a human rights abuse and the Chinese government should not be doing it? Why not just say
there should be no abuse of anybody, including people laugh, but there's been a hostile...
Well, I'm sorry. I find it incredible that any politician from left or right cannot bring themselves
since 2006
to condemn the genocide against the Uyghur Muslims. I find it incredible, Richard.
Well, haven't I just called for the United Nations to
but you haven't
be let in? And there are, and of course,
you're casting doubt as to whether it's happening.
No, of course, there are human rights abuses in China, and as I said repeatedly when I was answering the question, that our government needs to hold governments around the world to account on human rights abuses, whichever government it be, whether it be the government of China, whether it be Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Israel, or anywhere else. We can't be selective in relation to this. In relation to this question, we're talking about people dying on our shores in the context of having no safe route of passage, in the context of a hostile environment which has demonised migrants in this country. So we certainly as well need to put our own house in order in this country to the way minorities are treated in this country.
All right, Sophia?
Current system's clearly not working. We do need an overhaul of various aspects of the system, but this is not just about UK legislation. This is about, the Geneva Convention. We're going to have to look for broader regional solutions about this. It's not something that's just about the UK-France border. There is a much broader trend and issue at stake here, which, if you look ahead to the next decade and climate change and all of those other push factors, we need to be working with our neighbours and regional partners to come up with a bigger solution here.
Shall we lighten the mood for a final text from Jackie in Leeds? Apple and Spotify have revealed 2021's most streamed songs. What have you listened to most this year? Richard?
Iron Maiden's new album.
Iron Maiden?
Senjutsu. Very good album. Double album. Recommend
We can
it.
agree on this because they're West Ham fans.
Yes.
Excellent. We found a point of agreement. Jeff?
Well, they also did podcasts as well, just dropping that in there. But I would say Eric Prince.
Yes, we've done rather well on that, haven't we?
Yes, and the book as well. Audio book, does that count? That I've got out. But Eric Prince as well. Great, progressive. Eric Prince, you like your trance, right?
Yeah, I do.
Well, as I've got older, I've had to take a few beats per minute off it, but it's still got the big breakdowns, and yeah, he's a brilliant artist.
Okay. Tim?
Oh dear, I don't do music question. I haven't got Spotify. I like whatever is on.
Bit of Bach.
Well, I like everything. I'm very inclusive. Classical, new, modern, garage.
Garage. Now you're pushing it. Sophia?
Taylor Swift, old Taylor all the time.
Bit of a lookalike.
Maybe.
That was meant as a compliment before anyone says anything. You can't beat a bit of ABBA, I think. The new album, fantastic. Anyway, Tim Loughton, Sophia Gaston, Richard Burgon, Geoff Norcott, thanks for joining us on LBC and on Cross Question. If you missed any of it, and if you missed any of the last half an hour, you might want to revisit it on the Cross Question podcast or on our YouTube channel. We're going to be talking about Priti Patel and the migrant boats in a minute. It's been said today that the answer is not to turn them back. But if that's not the answer, what is the answer? 0345 6060 973. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Prime Minister has insisted no coronavirus restrictions were broken at a Christmas party in